Okay, so I better start by saying hello, Poppy.
Hello,
Thank you for talking to me today. We at the centre do, we always put out video content, and now more than ever, that seems to be really helpful to keep people updated about what we are doing and, certainly what our partners are doing. And very early days, it became very clear that there were a number of us that were championing in the equalities agenda. And you and I had a conversation very early on about some of our worries. And we were just, before we started recording, started talking about what that's been like for you. So can you just sort of tell us a bit about what's been happening since COVID began?
it's so I'm still processing, and I'm still in the thick of it, and I start with that caveat because not all of my thoughts are clear, and that's because it's the first time in a long time my thoughts and feelings about the work that I do, and not my job. I'm not talking about being the CEO of the City Mental Health Alliance, but the work that I do in life. My thoughts and feelings are very mixed up, and they're overlapping. And the reason for that is really early on with the pandemic. It was really, I just remember watching the news, and and in the early days we were all obsessing, when we were with the news. We were all watching news
Absolutely.
Constantly, and as the images of the people that came up that had died, it was so weird, because actually it was just loads of brown people. And in the media, as we know, mainstream media, BBC, Sky, it's not brown people's faces that you see white people's faces. So I guess it stood out on two different levels. It stood out on the fact that, wow, okay, this is really, it's a news story, and actually the people that are dying, that we're honouring through the news stories. So it's a humbling, honouring stories were of people that from my community and people that look like me. So it just landed on a different level. And then, of course, with the work that we do and we champion, I got involved in trying to understand what that is. I asked key government bodies, Public Health England. I wrote a blog. I picked up the phone to NHS colleagues, just trying to understand what the data was, and why was it a disproportionate representation of BAME people that were dying from the pandemic. And that took me off on a really harrowing journey of recognizing the discrimination that still exists in the health system, the discrimination that exists in society, and that actually there are some people who have always been disadvantaged and continue to be disadvantaged, and the pandemic has shone a light on that in a very stark, dramatic way. And I guess I felt a pull on my conscience, on my role in society, and my role as a leader, but also just as a Bangladeshi woman, to step back into the race space and ask the questions, because the people that are most impacted haven't necessarily got the voice, or the fact that they've experienced, or the fact that people have experienced so much futility and fear for so long that they just don't bother. So it's been it still remains a very difficult journey of raising the profile of an issue which stems from health inequalities that then impact people that look like me differently to others, and then being a BAME woman as well, because it lands differently. And I struggle I lose perspective, and I question whether I'm being over emotional, whether I'm reacting with my head or my heart, whether I'm sounding too passionate, too angry, which are all things that we get accused of as women. And I think something that you said to me the other day, the internalization of discrimination and the issues, that's some of the stuff that's playing out, and I'm just trying to work it out. So that was a very long answer.
No, I mean, I think it's you always speak so beautifully about such complex issues. So I think what I have been really struck by is in the face of all of the evidence, you're right, the optics, the images at first were incredibly disturbing and still remain disturbing. I think that it's backed up, that fear and that anxiety is backed up by what we are actually seeing. So even just the narrative today about health workers having to pay, for their own care. I mean, it feels to me it feels to me such a powerful and dangerous position to be in, and I can see that there are a lot of black and minority communities around the country feeling very, very scared, and it's really hard not to say yes. It's very frightening because the reassurance is really hard to get to. And I also worry, and this is something else that I think I'm very clear with you, is that as a woman of colour, you cannot be the person who alone takes this forward, that you need allies and people around you. But equally, we also need to step aside so that your voice and others are heard. So it's striking that balance, I think, across the system, but it is incredibly painful. And I don't know, it's interesting when you say, I don't know whether I'm using my head or my heart, or where it's all at. I mean, you're known for doing both very, very well. One thing I would say to you, you probably won't remember this, but this time of year is always very important for me because my dad died 8 years yesterday, and at the time, I was due to come to a mental health first aid event that you were running at the House of Lords, and I couldn't come. Cut to about 5 years later, and we meet again, and I'm in this role, and you had remembered the reason why I hadn't gone to that House of Lords event, which is quite an extraordinary thing. I mean, people get on with their lives. At that time you and I wouldn't have been close friends as we are today, but you remembered that. So that's that's your gift, that's your brand, that's your thing. And so it would be a surprise to me if you started operating at the moment in a kind of scientific way, and that's not what people need. I think we don't need that. We need a legitimate exposure to the feelings.
Yeah, do you know, so it's weird, isn't it? So you put me in any other job, and you and I have worked on different projects explicitly and implicitly together over the last few years, and most projects I take on board, and I guess that's the word, isn't it? They're projects, so they're things that I've got. There's a goal, there's a process. I trust in emergence, so I don't need an end outcome. I just know that if we apply the right principles and we've got the direction and we know what we want to achieve, we'll get there. So I have a huge amount, I'm a very trusting person, but I guess it's the fear and futility point that I made earlier. When it comes to race, and my career started in race. So I was race equality lead for a program called Delivering Race Equality for the Department of Health when I was 23. So I cut my teeth on this agenda, and I know how hard that was. So I guess it's not an unfamiliar territory, but having worked in it before, it's the fear and futility. I know that you only get so far, and actually doors are often very closed, and it's difficult to achieve outcomes in the same way as I can for other projects. And I guess what happens for me is I then start questioning, is it me that's the block because I'm so emotional about this? And actually I'm a bit of a dinosaur, so my experience is from the 70s and 80s in this, and am I bringing too much of the personal here that I can't project manage, or I can't? So does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally does make sense, and I think that probably would be reasonable if the evidence didn't point to some of the fact that your experiences were not being mirrored in the generations of today.
Yeah.
And so it feels like what you're bringing is a deep recognition of what's happening to people all over the country right now. And you know, sadly, we don't need any more evidence to tell us that profound health inequalities still exist and exist. And this pandemic, as you've said, has not only shone a light, but has, I think, brought us to a bit of a tipping point in relation to health inequalities. And so that might be my sense of optimism, you know, which is trying to balance the fear and futility. But the reality is, I don't know. I don't know. And I don't know if I've got the evidence yet to prove my optimism is right.
And I suppose that's where I feel like we've got an opportunity and every cell in my body says that we've got an opportunity to do something different if we coordinate. And I feel like civil society, us in the voluntary charity social enterprise sector, the CEOs that work in with communities, if we coordinate and if we collaborate, because all of our, whether you're a housing or you know, whether you're working in homelessness, on women's agendas, race agenda, you know, education, whatever your social purpose is as a CEO of the third sector, the VCSE sector, that if you the one common thing that we've all got in common, what we all align our mission and purpose to, is health inequalities. It's the determinants of health, you know, education, communities, good work, housing, so ability to have transport in the current climate, ability and financial resources to have data and internet and a laptop, because so if we all coordinate and if we all come together to go, okay, for the next 5 years we want to work together with our unique lenses to change, not lobby, to change the way policy is written and health inequality is experienced by some, and we want to see a reduction in the gap between the rich and the poor, then I think that is a national thing that we can all be proud of. And I think we need to do that, because frankly, I don't trust the current government to do that for us. I just don't. You know, there is a PhD review on this agenda, and it's led by Kevin, who I so completely respect. He is an amazing guy. But when you look at what the review is reviewing, and when you look at what the NHS review is reviewing, and I don't know whether they're talking to each other, they're going to give us a report which says the same old thing. You know, health inequalities exist, BAME people are dying. I know all of that. I know all of that. I don't need you to tell me all of that and pacify me again. And actually that makes me feel, as you can hear, really angry. Is I want to see change, and I just don't trust the government to coordinate that. So I feel like you, me, the mental health CEOs that have come together to form a coalition already, and actually who are the other CEOs in our broader community that we can bring in and talk about health inequalities and mobilize and do what civil society do best, change.
I think that's really important, because I think you're right. You know, the evidence, we're clear, the reports often do say the same thing. And I think there is something for me that I always have to be cautious about. And, you know, sometimes, you know, I don't manage this tension very well, which is the tension between, you know, campaigning, lobbying, all of that is really important, because I think so much of what we're talking about in the equality space is related to justice. And so, you know, I'm somebody who would definitely cast myself as a justice first person.
Yeah.
And therefore my language around it can sometimes be incredibly provocative and combative. And sometimes that helps, because I can say things that, you know, that are uncomfortable and feel okay about it. But sometimes that pushes backs against the wall. But I suppose my question and challenge is, I think we've done a lot over the last decade, which has been working alongside government, alongside partners. And I think there's been progress in massive areas as a result, but not this area. And so I'm wondering whether we've had a bit of a decade of being nice, and I wonder whether this opportunity of, you know, being in the middle of a global crisis allows us to say, you know what, okay, we're going to take over now because, you know, you're not cutting it, or, you know, take a bit more of an aggressive approach. What's your view on that? That's something I struggle with.
Do you know, so this is the first time publicly that I have, on record, on film, said that I don't trust the government to do the right thing.
Yeah.
And I've been working in the mental health world for all my career. And I guess that probably answers your question, which is enough is enough. You know, and I've got, I guess there's two things that spring to mind. You know, I've got so much energy left in this, and you know, I want to spend the next bit of my career not being burnt out by this agenda. I do, so we've got to be careful about that, because when you take this stance of enough is enough, you've got to then go, okay, what is it going to take from you? So I think there's that, and that's probably some of the stuff that we need to work out. What does that actually mean? I'm very happy to partner with anyone that's going to help progress the agenda forward, but I also want to I want us to collectively role model what the next generation should be doing, Sarah, because if we think we've had a journey on this, the impact of the pandemic, I've got 4 young people at home who don't know what their prospects of university is going to be. They aren't employed at the moment. One of them's got an underlying mental health condition already, so the impact on her is really interesting, and we're both watching her well-being carefully. You know, they grew up with this dream that they could travel the world, they could, and actually we don't know what any of that's going to look like. And a year in my life is 3 years in their lives. So we need to pave the way and demonstrate that what positive action looks like and what activism looks like, and so that they feel empowered. And I feel that as a massive responsibility on my shoulders to make sure that I lead by example. The other thing I think we need to do here is the global connection. And Sarah, you're part of a global community. I follow your Instagram and everything else. And you're pre-COVID, you and I were
air miles in.
Yeah, we've got our air miles in. So I think, and I've been part of a number of web meetings with global partners, and this agenda of Black and minority ethnic communities, the race agenda, the poverty agenda, the intersectionality of all three of those is playing out around the world.
Yes.
And in the current climate, if we can't mobilize the global community that is grappling with this, so if we can't find the likes of me and you in pretty much every country, then I think that's another failure, because it's
absolutely
about the younger generation, and it's about the world mobilizing itself and getting the experts.
But one of the things I think is really interesting about what you've said is that there are also those younger people who are teaching us.
Yeah.
So I look at Charity So White, for instance,
Yeah.
which is a brave social movement. Our head of children, young people, Kadra, is one of the founders, which I'm very proud of. I tell everybody because I'm so proud of the work she's done, but also the work that Charity So White has done, which has been to take up a very clear position. No compromises, clear position in terms of what does the evidence say, what are people saying, and they're presenting it in a no-nonsense way. And I was talking to Kadra the other day, and I was saying I'm reading a book called New Power, which is so interesting because it demands that people like you and I, who are leaders of, you know, of old, in that, you know, we've been around a while, not saying you're old, Poppy, but you know what I mean.
You know,
And
yeah.
you know,
Dinosaurs
we've yeah, we've earned our stripes. That we have to do something also to give space to the activism that generations are coming up with, and that we together you know, bring our energy together to create the change that you're talking about. Because I think what I've seen, actually, some organizations respond to Charity So White in a almost, oh, that's too much. No, we can you just tone it down a bit? And I've spoken to Kadra about never toning it down. You know, we don't need a toned down version of this. And so I think I suppose we're all saying the same thing, really, which is now is the time to be brave and to take the next steps. But I guess some of our colleagues might be asking, what does that mean for them? What does that mean for leadership? What does it mean for our partner organisations? What would you say to them about what they could and should be doing?
Yeah, I think there's operational stuff, there's thought leadership stuff, there's community stuff. So operational stuff, and this is already starting to happen, because I've seen funding pots, for example, that have thought about the health inequalities emerging and the people that are most disadvantaged, and gone back and ring-fenced parts of funding pots for the communities or the people that we identify at risk groups, in risk groups. That's one thing. But then there's another operational challenge, because actually people that are in risk groups, or they haven't got the bandwidth to, or those small organizations, or those bandwidth to apply for funding or reach for help, because their experience has been futility forever. So actually, it's not enough to go, oh, well, we've ring-fenced pots of money. We tried, they didn't take. You've got to ask yourself.
I love that one, but they don't apply for money.
Yeah, they don't. Oh, goodness sake, we try. Okay, so what I am saying is, I'm a community development worker. That's my best job title. And so we need to go, okay, if a project costs 20 grand, we need to then add another 2 on top for outreach, 2% on everything for outreach, because if you're a single parent in an abusive relationship who can't get out your house to actually make calls, you might not have data or money to seek support. What does outreach look like for you? So that's a conversation. We've got a plethora of helplines at the moment, and I was speaking to one of our colleagues in the coalition who chairs the organization that's sort of an umbrella organization for helplines, and I was saying, should we be setting up a separate helplines for BAME communities, or should we be developing the capacity and the capability of existing helplines? And her answer was the obvious: it's the latter. We should be So I'm not into, let's create another parallel load of stuff specifically. I'm up for the services that currently exist, that my tax money pays for, to be created in a way and to developed in a way that reaches those groups that are disadvantaged. So, because that will create sustainable change. Single pots of money won't exist ongoing. So that's, I think, a real operational thing that leaders, chief executives can think about and go, okay, well, if we're not reaching the people that are the most unwell, whatever your service is, then we're not doing the job right. So we need to set targets for achieving that, and we need to think about not siloed approach, actually developing the capacity so it lasts for longer. And I think in terms of community and thought leadership, Sarah, I think we're all going to learn together. And actually, what you've just said around Charity So White and our colleagues and our younger colleagues who are the leaders of the future, how do we hold them up, learn from them? But it's lots of these conversations need to happen, and we need to hear each other, because that's the only way we learn. I mean, that's the only way I learn it. Books help, but good quality conversations that are honest make change.
And I think there is something, isn't there, about recognizing that usual frameworks for power and communication just won't fit going forward. They just don't apply. And how can we move from a position of, we've got in mental health, we've got a very medicalized model of thinking about that. We've got a very, almost class-based model of community, as well as all of the other stuff around race and disability. And so I think we've got to the point where we need to really challenge the government to, have those devolved power networks really set up, which I think on one hand, you would imagine this government might appeal, they don't, a less dependent society on government maybe, but it also demands investment, and I think that we're heading into a period of very serious recession, and we at the centre are obviously incredibly worried about the economic impact, and the economic impact is always felt by people who have been marginalised from society already. And I guess one of the things that's happened over the last couple of months has been your extraordinary partnering with business that has brought in a huge amount of resource for the third sector, which basically is allyship on a very strategic corporate level, and that's really extraordinary. And I guess that we are moving into a time where those relationships are more important than ever. That being said, we are facing a time when grassroots organisations, we could be losing up to 40% of organisations that are serving the most vulnerable groups. And the money that's coming in is literally just a toe in the ocean. What do you think about that, really? How do we move from this?
I guess that's the $1 million question, isn't it? That's the problem. And I think we need a whole systems change for that to happen, for a solution to come from that. And I'm not sure that anyone has done that thinking properly. You can't have a healthy economy if you haven't got a healthy health system. And sometimes I think that we think that if we invest in health system and the NHS and social care and voluntary community organizations, it's counter to a healthy economy. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And so until that shifts, which I think again is an opportunity. So most of my work with the City Mental Health Alliance, the CEO, as my role in the City Mental Health Alliance, I'm speaking to our members who are primarily in the financial services sector, and they're all thinking about this in a different way now. And I guess I'm very lucky that the organizations I'm working with, they've been working on the mental health agenda for the last 8 to 10 years. So they're very well versed in this, how to look after their people, how to look after, and nobody's perfect. Everybody's got a long way to go. But I feel very, very heartened for the work that they've done. So when it came to going and asking about, okay, can you now help society on the same agenda, the mental health agenda? Everybody so far has gone, yes, of course we would, because they've been working on it. And I guess it's that, isn't it? That is when we have to go on journeys with people, but the city organizations I'm working with don't see investing in mental health separate to it being the opposite of business prosperity. Actually, if you
Yes.
look after your people, your business prosperity will sort itself out. And I guess that's the approach that government would have to take. Not, well, we're saving money by taking it away from the health, broadly the health and well-being sector, because we're investing in whatever it is. It's that's the narrative that they need to change, that actually investing in health is investing in people, is investing in the economy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I was told that I mustn't keep you all day, so I'm going to try not to. I think that this conversation is huge and probably one of the most important things that we need to do over the coming months, years. And you know, you and I have absolutely made that commitment to do whatever it takes to make sure that people's experiences are front and center of every conversation we have, which sometimes makes us unpopular, which is why our peer support and our relationship's quite important, and supporting each other around the system. You know, there are a number of us who are doing this in every place that we are. You know, we've got Jackie Dyer, we've got lots of other people who are literally with every fibre of their being holding this truth up to power in a way that you know, sometimes is heard, not always, but you know, it's their life's work. So I really appreciate you talking to me today, but just a final thought from me, which is I think that without quite assertive leadership going forward, we're entering dangerous times. And so, like you, I'm very willing to say also, I don't think that the government are in a position to take forward this agenda. So solidarity, I didn't want you to say that and not have that very clearly shared by me. And so we will continue to work together. But do you have anything just to end with, Poppy?
Just a thank you for stepping in, thank you for your kindness, thank you for getting it, and thank you for the solidarity, because goodness knows we need more of that, don't we?
Absolutely. Solidarity in the times of a pandemic. Whoever thought they would say those words?
Yeah,
I mean, not me, that's for sure. Thank you so much, and you are extraordinary, Poppy, and we all look to you for inspiration on a fairly regular basis. You are extraordinary.
Feelings mutual. And I'm loving the heart earrings. I wore
Oh yes,
more these for
especially
you.
for you. Lovely.
Right.
Gorgeous. See you later. Bye.
Bye.